Well, good morning. My name is Gary London, and I'm Senior Principal of London Moeder Advisors. And you'll see also on the screen Nathan Moeder, my partner. Say good morning, Nathan.
Good morning, Nathan.
I just say good morning. And we have with us a special guest. Her name is Heidi Vonblum. She's the planning director at the city of San Diego. She's been there a while. And good morning, Heidi. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I think I'm going to let you start. You're very welcome. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself first, but I would preface it by saying that this isn't the first conversation that we've had. You and I and Nate have had a number of conversations over the years regarding land use and regarding the city's policies and what direction you're taking the department. So we're going to have that discussion, maybe in a little bit of a repeat, but certainly this will be an update of what's going on at the city. So with that, Heidi, welcome. Maybe you could just give us a little background on your education and where you came from and how you got to be planning director and how long have you been there?
Going back a while, I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area. I went to college at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I have a bachelor's of science in city and regional planning. And then I went back up and lived in San Francisco as a land use and environmental planning consultant before I went to move to San Diego and got my law degree from the University of San Diego School of Law. I worked in a couple of other places, but primarily started my career out in the San Diego City Attorney's Office in the land use section. And then back in 2018, was fortunate to be able to transition my career over to the city planning department. And I've been happy to serve as the director for about the last 2 years.
Is that really true? You prefer being a planner versus a lawyer?
I do. And, the reason why is, it's fantastic to have a variety of members as part of your team. Everybody has a specialty. Our city attorneys provide a valuable service representing the city in a legal capacity, but it's limited in the scope that your role is to affect change in policy. The role in the city attorney is a lot more reactive to what is being proposed from the mayor's administration. So I love being a part of operational side of the organization and also get to work as part of a really amazing team. I have about 90 staff in my department that I have the pleasure of working with every day and really having the opportunity to build the team, work together to achieve really ambitious goals.
Well, and our true confession is that we've worked with you, Nathan and I have, on both a formal and an informal basis for a few years now, and that's the nature of that's what has created our relationship, in particular in the area of updating the community plans, where we have worked both as a consultant for the city and as a sub-consultant and as an informal advisor in helping to, at your invitation, to create some sort of financial and economic rationale to the land use planning process that you've been undertaking. How's the updating going?
First, I'll divert our conversation for a little bit and say I'm happy that you brought up the economic component to a community plan update. A lot of times when we embark on a community plan update, a typical person living in our community, doing lots of important things for society does not have the opportunity to understand the nuances of land use planning and what goes into that. And so it's a very complex process that is difficult to understand. But as you mentioned, it's not just about any one thing, right? So in general, we're looking to create opportunities for more housing for people on incomes in all communities, as well as opportunities for good jobs. That has to be grounded in what the market can absorb, what the market is reasonably able to deliver in terms of the plan. We don't just plan for the sake of planning. We do plan for the sake of seeing it implemented so that we have a comprehensive plan to ensure that we're planning for the needed growth that we know that we need to accommodate, as well as improving the lives of the people that live in the communities through that process.
Well, I was going to say, that's really refreshing. And where I was really going with the question was that, I'm a planner as well by training, and I actually spent a little time with the city planning department on staff real early in my career before I got into sort of what we do today, which is the intersection between land use planning and real estate economics. But really what has happened, what you have created at the planning department sort of has been music to our ears, the idea of creating some economic or some financial sensibilities to land use. And while these other things that you also have to weigh in on are hugely important, our bag is finance and what really will work. And really what we do is we answer the question, so we're creating these plans. Are those plans ever going to be implemented? You use the word implemented. The joke in planning, obviously, is we create plans and they end up on the shelves and they never get implemented. So the idea is you want them to be implemented, you want them to work. And one of the ways for them to work is to create economic sobriety on it. So the nature of our relationship the last few years with you has been to do pro formas and do analyses to help to determine whether the plans that you're creating, that you're contemplating, would actually translate into projects that would be built. And that's kind of a cool thing. And actually it's worked that way. Certainly in Mission Valley, we've had real good successes, and we're exploring those successes in some of the other updated community plans that we're doing as well. So my original question was, what's the status of the updated community planning process right now?
Yes, we have a lot of updates going on in the past year. Most recently, we've had Mission Valley, Kearney Mesa, and Mira Mesa adopted and in place. And then right now, the next ones coming down the pipeline are going to be a focus plan amendment within the Uptown community focused on Hillcrest, University, College area.
Right.
And then we anticipate Claremont, and then we're kicking off Mid-Cities community plan update right now, which, as you are probably aware, is a very large community planning area. We're very excited to have recently received additional grant funding through HCD's REAP 2.0 funding.
In relation to all the community plan updates that are going on, and when we've been involved with community plan updates, one of the feedback items that we get is that what's in it for the community. And I know that it's a lot to juggle. You want affordable housing, you want parks, you want streetscape. And one question I had is what's the approach and how's the city handling the creation of parks and park fees within the community? Because I understand there's the equitable issue in the city where some of the park fees is going to other underserved communities. But when you're putting a lot of density into different parts of the community plan, are you going to keep some of the park fees there because we need to create the kind of place to make it an exciting place to live, or is there any balance, or are park fees still going away to other places? I was curious about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's an example of something that's very complex, that is, a normal member of the community that has other things going on in their life is not going to have the time to go dig through the complexities of the issue. Yes, when we do community plan update, it's important not just to increase housing capacity, but it's important to increase housing capacity that can realistically be implemented, even though we know that there's external factors that we cannot control. So, we are not in control of interest rates, labor shortages, materials costs. It's market conditions in general. We do understand that, we are going to provide for some level of capacity that may not be seen, although we definitely try to right size that with what the market can bear. But in addition to that, there's other components of a community plan that are outside of just land use. So we look at public spaces and infrastructure, parks, mobility, circulation, urban design, overall ways to ensure that we are improving the lives of the people that live in the communities through our planning efforts. The ways that we do that are not always easy to, kind of facilitate, because these are long-term plans. It's really dependent on what is going to happen in the private market. So as development comes online is when infrastructure investments are intended to occur. In terms of the citywide development impact fees, the City Council did adopt citywide park development impact fees in 2022, and then citywide fees for other infrastructure in 2021 for the parks, and 2022 for fire, mobility, and library assets. And there is some, prioritization for prioritizing expenditure in underserved communities, but there is also clear policies that were adopted as part of those proposals that called for the prioritization of funding not just development impact fee funding, but funding in general to the areas with the greatest needs. And the areas of the greatest needs include the areas that are lacking infrastructure and have a greatest need from an economic standpoint. But it also specifically calls out the areas of greatest needs being those areas where the most people would be served and the areas experiencing the most growth. So following up on that, in December 2022, the City Council adopted amendments to two council policies called 800-14 and 000-32. And essentially what these two policies in combination look at was a new prioritization policy for how we as a city prioritize capital improvement projects. Those are infrastructure projects through our CIP budget process. So our department, City Planning Department, worked very closely with Department of Finance, as well as Engineering Capital Projects and all of the asset managing departments, including Park and Rec, Transportation, Library, and Fire, to identify new prioritization scoring criteria, which specifically takes into account exactly what your question went to, Nathan, with respect to, we need to be prioritizing infrastructure in our city where it is going to benefit the most amount of people and where we see this growth occurring. I do also want to remind everybody that development impact fees fund about 5 to 6% of the total CIP budget across the city. So while development impact fees are certainly an important funding source, they're not the only funding source. And in fact, most capital improvement program projects across the city are funded with other revenue streams. We work very closely. I have an entire team dedicated to not just the collection, but the expenditure of development impact fees. One of the things that the city has done in the past is it got very good at collecting development impact fees, but not as good as at expending it. So all of these reforms have been put into place very intentionally to be able to get us to a place where we are spending money. We are the government. It's not good to save money. It is good for us to spend money. It does people in our communities no good for it to sit in accounts, festering. So I have a whole team that is dedicated to also taking the funding that we have, both from the community-based, historical funds, as well as the citywide funds going forward, to allocate them to projects. But we do not do that in isolation. That is part of a much larger capital improvement program budget that does absolutely prioritize these areas where we're seeing significant growth.
Okay. The other question I had was, you and I talk a lot about family housing, and I'm wondering, other than the AB SB 9 and 10 and the lot splits, and what is the city looking at to create more family housing? And more specifically, is the city looking at any areas of communities where they specifically are keeping the density lower? Instead of doing 4- and 6-story structures, let's do 3-story structures that will be a townhome community, and be more intentional with building that types of housing throughout the city. Are we looking at anything like that?
Yeah, so, you and I have had a lot of conversations about this and fortunately agree on the issue, but San Diego, has a lack of housing in all communities, which is largely the result of an undersupply of housing for decades. So that's not something that can be fixed, this year or even next year, or with, one code change package. All of these packages we bring forward, there's no silver bullet. Nothing is going to unwind overnight a lack of housing that has been built for decades, right? But what we do have the opportunity now is to look at how we can begin to rectify that. But it's not just about providing housing. It's providing housing that people in our community need to live in. So what we hear a lot of the times is, can we go build housing capacity on a commercial corridor that would be less controversial because it's not as disruptive to somebody's life, less controversy. Unfortunately, projects that are the least controversial oftentimes do not serve the needs and bring us the outcomes that our city needs. I know few families with children that would like to live on a commercial corridor and raise their children there, myself included. I do live very near a commercial corridor, very, very, very near to it, and enjoy all of the benefits of walking and raising my children in a very urban environment. It's wonderful. But if you told me that I had to live with them in a 600 square foot micro unit on a commercial corridor itself, that would not work. And I am not the only one, right? We have families with children and intergenerational families all across our city. And if we only try to address our housing crisis through one product type, it's simply not going to work. Our job is more nuanced than just, one size fits all product types. So to your question, yes, it is a priority to be able to kind of shift the policy mindset in the city from hoping that a certain type of unit will be provided because the market doesn't provide that type. And we have seen that borne out in our housing data because we essentially, as a percentage of the new homes that come online, essentially, next to nothing is coming online in terms of family housing and missing middle housing. The other issue that we have that is missing is we have a complete lack of home ownership opportunities coming online. So again, we see a lot of rental housing, and that's great. We need more housing, but we still need to focus on the things that the market is not naturally delivering that our society and our community needs. There's a lot of barriers and challenges that come to providing for that home ownership opportunity that's going to require some action from the state. I think the Subdivision Map Act is in need of some reform that it hasn't gotten in a long time. Subdivision Map Act is great for ensuring that, that we're not building antiquated subdivisions that don't have access to utilities and roads and et cetera. However, in an urban environment, there's less of those concerns if they can be designed, to certain standards. I think that we really do need some reform to that process to make that simpler to get a lot of these homes into homeownership opportunities. In terms of the family housing, we're looking at 2, ideally 3-bedroom homes for families. We see the market, usually the unit mix. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the unit mixes are typically coming out at maybe 10 to 20% of 2-bedroom or larger at most onto the development projects. And that doesn't match up with the demographics of our population.
Right.
So the answer to that is yes, we do have more work to do. It is something that we always keep in mind. We do need to have that kind of lower density zoning available for townhomes and row homes that do provide families with children opportunities to get into homeownership and just live. But we do have to, really look carefully. We're a largely built out city. It's not an issue of, snapping our fingers and creating more land. The fact that the city has been able to still see 5,000 homes produced over the last several years each year is actually, although it is not enough, it is a testament to the amount of work that we've done from a planning perspective, because we used to get that number of units each year when we had largely greenfield vacant land, which is much less constrained to be able to develop. So it takes a lot of difficult conversations with respect to missing middle housing and providing for those types of missing middle homes. It takes looking at the history of redlining across our city and looking at how we can tailor our zoning policies to be anti-racist zoning policies.
You made me recall a conversation we were having a while ago about density bonuses, but one thing that I really applaud the city on is that they're now starting to think about allowing developers to do it offsite in conjunction with an affordable housing developer. And first and foremost, it's way cheaper to build affordable housing when you have tax credits. And so what I see that happening in the market is it would free up some of the financial burden of market rate projects, and you could probably tie density bonuses to 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom units on market rate developments. If you're putting the affordable component on a different site, different deal that's being built with tax credits, now you're seeing the economics work a little bit that will support these larger family units. But I don't know, I just thought about that. We could talk about it more some other time if you want to think about different policies. But I think that's the right thing to be considering at this point in time.
Yeah, what I'll just say there is that when we do look at offsite options, what we do want to make sure that we're doing is that we're affirmatively furthering fair housing, not just because it's a state law requirement, but also because it is the right thing to do. And so we want to make sure that we have affordable housing in all communities across the city, particularly focused in high and highest resource areas. because our low and high segregation and poverty areas disproportionately have a larger amount of affordable homes. And when we look at societal outcomes, we want to make sure that when we have an off-site option, that we're still affording the people that will live in those homes access to the same opportunities that they would have, substantially similar to if it was within the subject property development site.
Yeah, it's interesting because complete communities has been slowly changed over the years as you process projects and learn from your I don't want to say mistakes, but learn from what has played out. And clearly what has played out is that there was a really positive emphasis initially on creating more density, getting as many units in as possible. And that has sort of subtly changed now. What I'm hearing you say from just number of units to type of units. In other words, serving the communities that have been possibly unserved, what we call the missing middle, families, and that sort of thing, which is really a really key important growth in city policy. And I just want to sort of emphasize that we consider to be a positive change and one that we think is going to be very helpful to the community. We don't always have to go to highest density. In fact, we often advise our clients when they have the option of going complete community to just developing a project by right. From a financial perspective, oftentimes by right works better because of lower density, lower cost of construction. They can build a wider array of units that they can fill and attain higher rents or higher for sale prices. So making these changes and allowing flexibility in the changes is a really positive thing. As a matter of fact, my soapbox point is really this: having worked with the city and in the city for so many decades, what I always remind people of is no matter how critical you are of the city, and we all can be critical of our city, of our policymakers, of our bureaucracy, you're all easy targets. But the reality is that the city has done a lot for housing that it never used to do. The city really has stepped up. So we're sort of, I don't want to say biting along the edges, but we're in the process, or you're in the process of making the kind of changes that are required to really maximize the amount of housing units that we can achieve and still get the right kind of housing units. So I think that, that's my way of sort of applauding what the city has done. What I'm curious about is, as you're starting to move into the updated plans, into places that are sort of north of Mission Valley or north of I-8, into the old, what I'll call the old suburbs, the Mira Mesas and in Claremonts, those communities. Are you going to be applying the same kind of density philosophies in those communities as you are in the uptowns and the Hillcrests and in the college area and so forth?
The reason why we do community plans is because every community, has unique opportunities, challenges, etc., existing conditions. So no, we're not going to apply the same philosophy across the board in all community planning areas. Some community planning areas don't have access to good transit, and from a climate perspective, they're not an ideal place for us to be prioritizing our housing efforts. Other areas have huge potential to be in alignment with our climate goals. So kind of going back to, it's not as simplistic as just, housing. We have a responsibility as city planners to make sure that our housing policies align with all of our other policies. So that includes our climate goals, our equity goals, our conservation goals, environmental. These are all important things that we have the job and responsibility to ensure that we're getting right when we're doing it. So, a lot of focus from a public and media standpoint can be on that land use map, but there's a lot more that goes into it and how we got to that, particularly with respect to climate policy now.
So there's been a lot of emphasis in the last couple of years on housing next to transit or next to transportation. And I don't want to beat that one to death. Obviously, it's really important to have that in mind. What I want to ask is this: has there been or will there be a renewed emphasis in housing near jobs, or in allowing a larger tent or larger umbrella of projects that can be built where there's an incentive to build near jobs or create jobs where the housing is. I mean, obviously, the world has changed. People work at home now. The biggest transportation solution I've always professed is creating housing near jobs and jobs near housing, so people don't even have to get on roads or transit. Is there any sort of active conversations or policies that are pushing those two worlds together?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, you don't just have to have housing near transit or housing near jobs. Ideally, we could have housing and jobs near transit. And in a lot of instances in our city, we do have that. We do have many instances, myself included, where, I have access to transit, and I also have very easy access to my job as well. It's challenging. We're a very geographically diverse city, very large city that 1.4 million people live in. And so we heavily rely on data, primarily from our regional planning agency, to be able to identify commute patterns and how people are moving around throughout the day. But yes, in our planning, we are very much focused on providing opportunities, not just for housing, but for good jobs that also are located close to transit. We do have other opportunities, and one of the things that we really try to focus on is providing flexibility that allows the market to innovate. So if we have a new job employer that would be looking to come to San Diego, and it's not located currently close to transit, but this employer has a plan to provide for that connection to any kind of housing for their employees, that's something that we really try to build into our programs to allow for that flexibility and innovation to occur as well.
When I think about this kind of a conversation, I reflect on the fact that the Gary London in his 20s and early 30s would not recognize the Gary London today. I won't say exactly how old I am, but it's a lot older than that. And the reason is because I think when I came out of planning school, I came out with sort of a philosophical construct where land use planning and more stringent regulation was the way to go in achieving the kinds of goals that you've articulated this morning. And I've sort of come to a point where, and this is where the world has changed and our economy has changed, the kind of jobs we have changed, the way we live has changed, such that I feel now that we need less land use direction and more flexibility in terms of density, in terms of height, particularly in terms of mix of uses. And I have a sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the city really has corrected to that, has changed to that philosophy as well.
Yeah, and what it is it's not a philosophy that there shouldn't be parameters on new growth, right? It's not intended to be a free-for-all. It's really intended to ensure that we do achieve the improvements to the communities that we are planning for. There used to be, kind of this focus on the regulation and the stringency of that regulation. And we know that resulted in development not happening. And development not happening when we have a growing population is catastrophic for people who have children that want to live here, or people that move here. This is
for the economy in general.
For the economy in general, our city is dying if it is not growing, and so we need to be able to keep up with that. What I would say for our philosophy, for our regulations that we bring forward, is that we're focused on outcomes. We're not focused on the nitty-gritty of how we get there. We need to be able to provide the flexibility to the development community to be able to achieve the desired outcomes that we have identified. So, kind of to your point there, if our desired outcome is, new housing, with a mix of product type, with, affordable, depending on what the project is to certain populations, and we want it, to blend in nicely with the community and, have, contribute to pedestrian walkability, we can state what those desired outcomes are through regulations without micromanaging the nitty-gritty details of that, which allows the market to bring projects to fruition. Same thing with parks. We can identify what the desired outcome of the parks to be provided, not just through the size of the park, but through the general amenities that would be required, without having to dictate through regulations the nitty-gritty specifics of that, so that we can allow a developer to design a space that works for their development and also can provide a wonderful asset to the community.
Well, this is a city that's in remarkable change right now. I sort of tritely put it, we're going from a horizontal city to a vertical city, or a much more urban city. And it seems like the planning department is not only following that trend, but really leading that trend in terms of all the things that you're doing. What would you say is the biggest tension that you have in your day-to-day life in terms of dealing with your job?
I think the biggest tension is that, I mentioned this earlier, but the housing prices and situation that we're seeing right now is not because of something that happened overnight. It is something that happened slowly over decades of time. And it's frustrating for people because the rental prices are exorbitantly high. The cost to purchase a home is out of reach for most people that live in San Diego. And when we see new developments coming online and we look at the prices, it can compound the frustration, because people say, well, we approved this development and it's still very expensive. And the economics of it are that we can't bring housing prices down through one single development after we've underbuilt for so many decades. So I would say that that's a tension too. It's a frustration, and it's a valid frustration, because people need to be able to afford to live here and raise their families here. And it's not something that we're able to solve overnight, but it is something that we can strategically have a slightly longer term plan, and that we are taking action today to implement to be able to get there. A lot of times too, another thing that could be frustrating is that when we see new projects come online, they're inherently more expensive than our older building stock, because most people, when they're going to rent an apartment, are going to pay more money for a newer building other than an older building, which is a perfectly fine home, but it's older, and therefore the market's going to have a lower rate for that. Nobody in their right mind is going to pay the same amount in rent, for a brand new building versus, a building that may have more maintenance challenges. So that's the other thing too, is kind of understanding that it's a ladder, right? When we have a new project come online that has more expensive rents, that frees up other housing units that may be, slightly more affordable. But again, I would say my biggest challenge is that we're not able to bring housing prices down to an affordable level overnight.
That's interesting, because, and I appreciate that answer. I thought that you were also going to answer that perhaps another big source of tension is convincing people who already live in the communities to accept the kinds of density that really are required to try to take a bite out of the housing needs in the community.
Yeah, that would be my second one. It's hard, right? People have lived, invested, and love and cherish their communities, and human nature is that it's sort of hard to accept change, but then the other part of human nature is that sometimes when the change comes, it kind of turns out okay. Yeah. We see this a lot. Like, for example, when the Target Express first came into South Park, community was very opposed to it. Everybody goes there. It's a nice place for people to be able to walk instead of having to drive their cars to Mission Valley. They have the opportunity to walk over to the Target, pick up their needs. And, it really hasn't been catastrophic to the community. Yeah. But by the same token, we want to make sure that, we listen to everybody, and that we can make sure that we have a plan to integrate new housing opportunities in a way that enhances the community. The goal is not to be able to, bring new housing in a way that is going to destroy a community. It's absolutely, we would be failing at our jobs if that's what we were doing, right? So our job is to be able to intentionally plan for these areas to make sure that we are enhancing the community when new development is coming in. And there's tons of benefits that can come when new development comes into an existing community. more people, more neighbors, more friends. It can reinvigorate schools and the school community to have more children moving into the neighborhood. It can bring more, opportunities for shopping and restaurants, really great things that people will have the opportunity to enjoy. But it is definitely a tension because a lot of people that lived in San Diego are, haven't been used to something for so long. So yeah, it's definitely a tension. And we, the city planning department, are here to be able to ensure that the change that is being planned for is positive for everybody that lives in our communities.
I only have a couple really brief last questions to ask you that I think are important. One is that we're seeing a huge change in the commercial environment right now, where a lot of office space that was historically and principally dedicated to office is just not going to be occupied in the future for all kinds of reasons that we've addressed in other videos in the past and that you well know are out there. Is the city working on being able to allow owners of these office assets to flexibly adopt, to convert, to change to other uses?
Yeah, in many instances, it's already allowed. A lot of the zones that office uses are located in already would allow or residential in there. We also have some reforms that we plan on bringing forward to the city council for consideration that would streamline the approval process to convert commercial to residential where residential is already allowed. There's also state laws, AB 2011, SB 6, that allow for that conversion when certain requirements are met as well. What I would say is that, yes, it's a fantastic opportunity where we see vacant commercial spaces. Any kind of vacant space is not good for a community. And so if we can, look at opportunities to turn that in to effectively use our land for something that we're lacking in, which is housing, that is fantastic. It's not without challenge, right? Because there are areas that we did not anticipate in our planning for residential to occur. And so those would be commercial zones that do not allow for residential uses. Those are much more challenging. So it's very location specific because residential uses are a different type of use than commercial. We need to have schools, parks, walkable neighborhoods for those really to be successful. So in the areas where we haven't planned for that residential, that's a little bit more challenging, but we do have plenty of office space in our city in areas that we had planned for residential that would be great opportunities for that conversion to occur.
And it sounds like the city's open to accommodate whatever
Yes.
we may going forward. Heidi, thank you so much for talking to me today. Is there anything you want to say that we haven't asked?
I don't have anything else. Just want to thank you for the opportunity. It's always great to have these conversations with you. Looking forward to more.
Well, here's what I want to say. Keep up the good work. I don't know if this is your dream job or not, but in many respects, you are the perfect planning director at a time where we really need people like you in the community to step up and address, what we've described as a really dynamic, changing city with lots of problems, but really with lots of opportunities. It seems like the city is doing that, and a lot of that is because of your direction. We really appreciate it. I appreciate the time you took today.
Well, thank you. I will look forward to sticking with it.
Good. Okay. And thank you so much.